Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us today for the ripple effect of everyday QAD changes on MRP. I'm Denise, and back to continue our MRP education is Don Lindsey, our QAD and MRP guru. And now, as I hand off to Don, here are some highlights of the vast experience Don Lindsey brings to his every presentation. So Don, whenever you are ready.
Can you see?
Yep, looks good.
Alrighty, that sounds good. So good morning. And thank you, Denise, for that glowing introduction. After our first session last month on the details of item master and bills, nuts and bolts of MRP, today I'd like to cover a little bit more in depth in the actual calculations of material requirements planning and how it updates and displays and changes based on normal activities in our operations. MRP by its virtue is somewhat complex, non-linear, but after we've covered all the details and aspects of MRP, the whole process should become clear. Here's just a few of the things we'd like to cover today under the headings of how MRP works, the netting process, types of purchases, orders, work orders, sales orders, inventory. So there's many terms, definitions that you need to become familiar with if you're going to deal with MRP. Such concepts as order policy, item status, structure, min-max, all need to be understood to approach MRP. If you don't know the meaning of a term or phrase I use, please use Google, look it up, ask ChatGPT, Claude, I just got Claude 3, Bard, Perplexity, whatever you use, or go to the knowledge base or send us an email. Remember, everyone uses expressions for basically the same thing. You need to understand how your organization uses the terminology. But before you start, I suggest you have a good solid set of work instructions and a company data dictionary or wiki. It's always good idea to have a view of the top 10 or 20 ERP systems in the market. You never know when your company is going to be sold out from underneath you, or you change jobs to a better position. Remember, Ollie White said MRP is MRP is MRP. They all work the same. The knowledge of generic MRP processes is going to give you a good basis to learn and operate any of these top ERP packages. Since the start of the computerized business operations back in the 1950s and 60s, we have seen that MRP sits at the very center of our ERP systems. If we hark back to the Apex ERP flow diagram, there is MRP at the center of the process. A characteristic is a distinguishing trait or property of something, and the primary characteristics of MRP are that it is product-oriented, as we talked about last month. It's time phased. The computer gives us the capability of creating calendars to be able to project into the future. It's forward looking. It's based on a forecast, master schedule, production plan developed from our business operations. And what I'd like to get through is the idea of flexibility. It replans priorities based on changing environments through what we call the explosion. MRP is very malleable, challenging, but malleable. MRP is based on what is called the principle of exception. Only manage that which goes wrong, not that which goes right. If MRP is in phase with the plan, there's no need to notify you of any exceptions. The inputs to MRP system are, first of all, the master production schedule. People create the master production schedule for orders, for independent demand items. We have inventory, the perpetual record, which we'll talk about, inventory records, allocations. We have a bill of material that we talked about last month for the structure of our products, and for planning data, planners, buyers, engineers, customer service all get together and populate the MRP system with planning data. Remember, It's not the system. I get so upset when I hear somebody say, oh, the system doesn't work. No, it's not the system. QAD works very well. It is people who make the system. So what specific pieces of information are you going to need for MRP? First of all, you need demand, either a master production schedule, forecast, time phased out across the horizon. As we spoke last month, there's the bill of material, how it goes together. Shop orders, I'll spend some time on talking about shop orders, which allow us to track and manufacture or assemble what we sell. We must have a quantity on hand. This is called the perpetual record. This is critical. Purchase orders and a computer. There's lots of calculations involved in material requirements planning, and the computer allows us to do those processes. Remember, MRP is just a stupid computer process that only does what you tell it. So some of the assumptions that MRP make is, first of all, it assumes you will do what it says. If it tells you to do something, release a work order, it assumes you're going to do that. It assumes you told it the truth. Don't lie to the computer. It uses what is referred to as the rules of misalignment. We'll talk more about that later. But basically, MRP assumes it's easier to expedite an order than place a new order. If you told it it's going to take X days to complete an order, it assumes it's going to be done in that time. If it tells you through one of its messages to expedite, delay, some other message, it assumes you are successful at that process and that you have told it everything you know. Do not use spreadsheets. MRP does have its limits, but if we're aware of them, we can plan and accommodate for these shortcomings. First of all, MRP is capacitive insensitive in that it ignores critical resources. That's why we do rough resource requirements planning and rough cut capacity planning above MRP and capacity requirements planning below MRP. It's a very sensitive interface. MRP is overly demand sensitive. So we do sales and operations planning above MRP. We have time phases, we have forecasts, we ensure lead time accuracy so that we are not sensitive to those demand changes. And as I mentioned, it assumes 100% accurate data. Consistent, accurate understanding. MRP can only deal with what it is fed, planned versus actual. Other observed shortcomings, which we'll talk about at MUG in April, are that it is a limited focus on variation and variability. There is an overemphasis on inventory in MRP in that it doesn't really look at the flow of the product. It ignores bottlenecks, and it can tend to be rigid and can lack real-time information. After you understand all the inner workings of MRP, you can mitigate these issues. Over the last many years, the acronym PFEP has been used to refer to a rigorous approach to planning that defines a plan for every part. Repeat, every part. A plan for every part involves part information, like we talked about last week, part data, planning, cost, how we're going to control inventory, what the material flow is, detailed, defined material flow. How is it used? Is it hazardous? How are we going to account for space? Do I have 2 million screws that I've got to have barrels for? Do I need refrigeration? Supplier collaboration for every part. Who is the buyer? Who are the contacts at the vendors for coordination, communication, and supplier data? Supplier network is critical for MRP. And every part has a variability. That is a variability in demand and or supply. For each part, we need the history, actuals, by period, etc. And continuous improvement. As conditions change, new information becomes available, plan is updated. By creating a detailed plan for every individual part, organizations can enhance their overall production efficiency, reduce lead times, and better manage inventory. So let's look at how MRP works and how do we make that plan for every part? MRP goes through several unique sequential processes. First of all, determines gross requirement, dependent, independent demand, and compares that to available to determine available inventory. It then calculates what is called net requirements, gross minus available minus allocations. Then it calculates planned order receipts and offsets those by lead time to calculate a planned order release date. And then it generates action messages. It does this level by level throughout the bill of material. The MRP process can be broken down into 4 steps. Identify requirements, check inventory, schedule production, identify issues. We need to answer the question, what do I need? What do I have? And what do I need to go get? Now that we have a good idea of the item master, BOM, and the processing steps from MRP, let's look at the basic MRP record. First of all, we see gross requirements, sales orders, customer orders, sales forecast. Then there are scheduled receipts, purchase orders, work orders, production orders, purchase orders. These balance against the quantity on hand to arrive at what is called the projected quantity on hand. And now out throughout the horizon, in this case 5 periods, we can then calculate the quantity on hand in time t by looking at quantity on hand in t-1 plus scheduled receipts in period t minus gross requirements. So we can see that at the end of period 1, we still have the 10 that we had on hand, but now we've got 20 as a scheduled receipt coming into inventory during period 2. So the new projected available equals 30. We take that out, and when we encounter the 35 required in period 5, the projected quantity on hand goes to a negative. A negative projected quantity on hand equals a net requirement. MRP is going to plan for the satisfaction of that net requirement by a planned order receipt offset by its lead time, and MRP will come back into inventory and net, and then that is going to carry off into the next period. There are a couple of specific calculations that we should understand and code properly. The first is a projected quantity on hand. In the first period, the projected quantity on hand is equal to the on-hand inventory minus allocations plus scheduled receipts minus gross requirements. In subsequent periods, it is calculated as equal to the previous period's projected quantity on hand plus scheduled receipts minus requirements. Note that safety stock is not included in this particular calculation. Net requirement is a projected requirement of MRP. The net requirement represents the minimum quantity required in a period to meet the cumulative demand through that period. It does not reflect any lot sizing at this point in the process, and a net requirement exists when the prior period's projected available plus the current period's scheduled receipts minus the current period gross requirements minus safety stock goes negative. Net requirement calculation is the only time that safety stock is considered. Scheduled orders represent to MRP anything that is going to be received into inventory over the foreseeable production horizon, such as purchase orders, supplier schedules, work orders, production orders. In MRP, when the actual receipt is posted in QAD against a purchase order, work order, production order, the scheduled receipt is relieved. Scheduled receipts typically originate from open purchase orders, production order schedules. They are considered available for use at the beginning of the period due. They are also called on order quantity or paper released. MRP does not automatically reschedule these scheduled receipts. However, you might receive a suggested reschedule netting or message based on netting. We also need to understand the different types of orders that are generated in MRP. The first is a planned order. A planned order is a system recommendation for additional supply to cover a net requirement. It is scheduled to be available for use at the beginning of the period when the net requirement exists. It is replanned every MRP explosion. The system uses planned lead time to determine when the order must be released to production or the supplier to be available on the date of need. The planned order release is exploded to determine what components are required for the supply order. The planned order release of the parent becomes the gross requirement of the component. Firm planned orders are planned orders that are frozen in time. Computer is not allowed to change a firm planned order. It is the responsibility of a planner, normally a master scheduler. It's the human being overriding the normal logic of material requirements planning for a single planned order. The use of planned orders can aid planners in responding to material and capacity issues by modifying lead times, compressing lot sizes, or adjusting capacity. If you are not using 22.20 Master Schedule Workbench, 16.4.1 Production Order Workbench, or our 32 Soft Production Planner, you need to start using these. To summarize the types of orders, you should understand the impact of each order in terms of the explosion of the bill and the ability of the computer to automatically calculate a new schedule. If you look at scheduled receipts, they do not automatically explode because they're paperwork released. They're already in the system. The computer does not reschedule them. However, planned orders do explode and they are automatically rescheduled. MRP does its trick. The firm planned order explodes and the human mind comes into play and it takes control over what the schedule is. Let's look at how orders affect the netting process in MRP. Here is the netting process of gross to on-hand plus scheduled receipt for a total available to net requirement. If we start off with 100 units, you can see the gross requirement is 100. If we have 2 on hand and a scheduled receipt of 25, that means we have a total available of 27. If we look at the difference between the 100 and the 27, we see we've got 73 net requirements. The net requirement or a planned order release of the parent becomes a gross requirement component. So that 73 drives down. If we have 5 and 25, 30, that means we have 43 as a net requirement, for this case in terms of part number A. That 43 drives down. If we look at the quantity on hand and scheduled receipts, that gives us a 40 net available. And then finally, that drives down to the lowest level and tells us whether we need to order any parts. So that's the order netting process. Let's look now at a single level MRP grid for a multi-level netting process and how we calculate for multiple ship tos, multiple parents, and subject to the gross to net requirement that we looked at. You're going to need to look at and consider lots of different things. You're going to have to look at bills of material, customer orders, sales orders, on hand, allocations, scheduled receipts, planned order due dates, etc. for, in this case, part number 1. And if we see part number 1, we see we've got 95 on hand, 20 allocated, a safety stock of 10, the lead time is 3 periods, and the lot size is 100 units. So if we look at the gross requirements, we can see that for period 1, there's 15 in period 1. That comes from a master production schedule or independent demand or forecast. Then in period 2, we see 40, 25 of which come from the relationship between 1 and X. It takes 4 periods to build an X. If we need it in period 6, that means it's going to need the part number 1 in period 2. And if we also see that 15 is again required for part number 1, we can now load that for the 40. 40 from period 3 comes from 1 going into Y, takes 6 periods to build a Y. So we need the 40 in period 3. We can see the 30 come in period 4 from the 1 required for X's in period 4, 15 for the Y's in period 11, and 45 for the period in period 7. So now we can look at the projected quantity on hand. We have 95 on hand. We've got a gross requirement of 15. That brings it down to 70. And we're going to have an allocation of 10. So we start off with 60, and we can carry that out across the horizon until we encounter a negative projected quantity on hand. That is going to generate a net requirement, and you notice the net requirement includes the safety stock for that part number 1. We can lot size it, offset it by lead time. It's going to come back in inventory, and that 90 is going to carry into period 8. So that MRP, I remember talking to Pam, and she telling me that Carl, and she wrote the QAD MRP based on the Apex body of knowledge with help from the Oliver White Company, and specifically from a gentleman named Chris Gray, who I knew, and it was interesting to see. But here you can see the MRP grid. You can see that QAD MRP summary report has gross requirements, scheduled receipts, projected quantity on hand, net requirements, planned order release, and planned order receipt. And you can do this in either vertical or horizontal displays. As we've talked before, control files are the way that MRP controls applications. So in MRP 2314, you see the horizon, how you're going to treat order release, what servers are there. There's a new functionality called gross requirements update that looks very interesting in terms of that. And I find Eric Kimbling at Third Stage Consulting very knowledgeable about the ways of ERP. I would highly recommend anybody go listen to lots of the videos that Eric has on YouTube. MRP can be powerful and a useful tool for manufacturing operations, but it requires careful implementation and continuous improvement. To ensure MRP is successful, it's important to define objectives, choose the appropriate software, train and educate staff and the stakeholders on how to manage the system, review, update, and process regularly. Additionally, understanding how MRP works, what benefits it offers, and factors you need to consider are essential for successful implementation. With the right steps, you can enjoy the advantages of MRP in your operations. Just to review, a reminder, last week we talked about the item master file, static, planning, cost. There are 21 individual values you must understand how to use in MRP. We also talked about bills of material, parent-child relationships, quantity per, critical to MRPs, structure types, etc., etc. Now that we have a fair understanding of items and BOMs and what drives MRP, let's consider the 4 primary elements that drive material requirements planning on a daily basis. First are purchase orders. Purchase orders allow organizations to formally procure required materials from preferred suppliers at established terms. Purchase orders provide standard documentation flow for procurement and accounting. Each of the purchase order elements should be represented in the setup of suppliers 28.20.1.1, supplier create 2.3.1, and business relationship create 36.4.1.3. Purchase orders in the MRP grid can represent planned or firm or scheduled receipts. Let's look at the process of creating a PO in MRP. Here we see the 2314 MRP detail report for an item from before MRP. Note that 2314 relates directly back to that MRP grid. In 5.7, purchase order maintenance, we create a scheduled receipt for the item on the line of the PO or the scheduled receipt. So this creates a purchase order. You can see here, PO 41545. This creates a scheduled receipt for the purchase item. It also reduces or eliminates planned orders for a purchase item at the next explosion, depending on how you treat the MRP action messages. And the 5.7 header defines the supplier, while a line defines the item, quantity, and due dates. A purchase order will increase the scheduled receipt value in MRP. Here we see the scheduled receipt for 41545 that shows in the rows in 2314. After the supplier acknowledges the receipt of the purchase order, the supplier then produces the parts and ships the parts to the receiving dock. The 5.13.1 purchase order receipt is used to receive the item from the PO into inventory. This will show as an RCT-PO in 3.21.2 transaction by item browse. Also moves from a scheduled receipt to the quantity on hand, which increases inventory of the perpetual record. It also decreases scheduled receipts for the PO. A purchase order receipt is a key transaction capturing delivery of the item to acknowledge that orders are received and related system and accounting records are updated successfully. As we can see, the previously open PO is no longer visible in 2317 MRP grid. The 5.13.1 purchase order receipt changes MRP from scheduled order to the quantity on hand. There are many data elements required for MRP that are the responsibility of buyers and suppliers. Inaccurate maintenance of these elements can cause MRP to calculate incorrectly or wrong. Open quantities, due dates, promise dates, needs dates, quantity to receive, receiving, returns, ASNs, supplier schedules. All procedures need update practices to be defined to ensure accuracy. The supplier schedule is a purchasing document used to establish a long-term agreement with suppliers for procurement of goods. This includes supplier information, scheduled delivery, period validity, order release process, flexibility requirements, consolidation of invoicing, and volume discount. Supplier schedules afford much control over specific item dates in MRP. The main differences are supplier schedules are a vendor plan to deliver it. Purchase orders are fixed transactions. Supplier schedules help plan potential material. Purchase orders drive execution and receiving. Schedules can be updated frequently as vendors change projections. Purchase orders are static transactions. If the forecast does not materialize, nothing happens with the schedule. Purchase orders are fixed. Suppliers' schedules contain expected period deliveries from suppliers. Purchase orders have firm deliveries and due dates. Purchase orders are legally binding agreements, whereas supplier schedules are non-binding forecasts. Purchase orders generate accounts payable upon receipt of goods. Schedules do not affect accounting. I love that. Supplier schedules are more intense than purchase orders, so the process requires a little bit more concentration. The 5.5 supplier schedule accounts for the setup suppliers, the processing of schedules, receiving of schedules, and shipping. All drive MRP. If you want to look at an explanation of supplier schedules, Olena has a purchase perfection with supplier schedule webinar out on the 32Soft website. Just a quick word about MRP and blanket orders. Be very cautious of blanket orders. They require special attention, and probably most importantly, MRP does not recognize it as a source of supply. This will probably change with later versions of QAD, but do not attempt to use blanket orders for MRP. If you want to use MRP plan to purchase orders, consider using the supplier scheduled orders. Let's consider one of the more important sources of supply, and that is the work order. In 2019 and above, you have the opportunity of using production orders in QAD. This is a whole nother thing. You can see there is a webinar out on the 32Soft website that explains how production orders work and the differences, but basically, as far as MRP is concerned, they're both treated very similarly. The work order is a document that authorizes, formalizes the steps required to complete a specific manufacturing job, service request, or units of production. The work order contains elements that define the manufacturing process, such as items, start dates, quantities, assets, locations, priority, classifications, sign-offs, all things needed by QAD to capture job requirements, schedule work, assign resources, manage execution, and track cost and history for work performed. Work orders provide a standardized documentation and coordination of operations. In QAD, we create work orders in 16.1. 16.1 creates the new schedule order in our status. Work orders can change status from P to F to E to A to R to C to denote how MRP should include those work orders in its netting calculation. Work orders increase scheduled receipts in the MRP grid, and it increases planned order receipts in the MRP grid. Pay particular attention to the quantity and due date, as these determine so much of what happens in MRP from a scheduled cost and profit. Planners need to understand the progression of MRP order status, which changes from P to eventually to status C. As mentioned, the manufacturing work order serves as the authorization for production. Manufacturing order consists of 16.1, which defines the work order, the part number, the quantity issued, etc. The 16.13.1 work order bill maintenance allows the planners to change component items, component requirement dates, and component allocations. So let's look at the work order process and how MRP is updated. Here's the 2317 MRP detail report for a part number before we create the work order. Now, this shows a newly created work order, 230-344 for item KTO20589. The 16.13.1 work order bill maintenance allows the modification of components, quantities, dates, lot sizes to work orders. You can use this to increase allocation or increase or decrease gross demand in MRP. Here's a picture of a component after the increase of gross requirements in 16.13.1. The 1610 work order component issue moves component items from inventory into the work order production order. Inventory transactions occur at different points in the work order process depending on your procedures and methods. Component item quantity on hand is reduced by the 1610, either through the issue, or you can do it through backflush, or you can combine the work order backflush and a work order receipt into a single transaction of 1612. Either method works to keep track of inventory transactions in the 16 or the ISS-WO in 3.21.2. The 16.5.12 is the new production order component issue. This is to the production order process as the 1610 is to the work order process for QAD. Here is a look at the component of a work order ordered for 2344 before the 1610. The 1610 work order shows the work order receipt of 1611. Work order receipt can be viewed in 3.21.2 as RCT-WO. This moves the scheduled receipt column to on hand and increases and decreases WIP. Here we see the work order reduced by the 1611 work order receipt. This decreases WIP, and the RCT increases quantity on hand in the MRP display. There are several issues that could adversely affect processing in work orders in your MRP environment. These might include the improper use of work order types, work order statuses, unforeseen shortages, no standard corrective action, work order due dates, release date, routings, incorrect quantity required and allocation. This process requires excellent warehouse and operation teams, and they need to be trained on how their actions affect MRP. A sales order in Q80 ERP application represents a specific customer request for product or services. Sales order initiate the process of fulfilling customer demand by creating a formal record of items requested by customers. Sales order provide critical input to MRP as this is the demand for products. By processing sales orders, MRP can calculate net demand, plan production, and ensure sufficient inventory is available for future customer orders. The sales order represents a portion of the gross requirement in the MRP grid. As the old saying goes, if you don't sell it, don't make it. Let's create a sales order and see the demand in MRP while we use 7.1.1. The sales order line data creates gross requirements in MRP based on the item, quantity ordered, and due date. Here we see the gross requirement or demand in MRP from the sales order. Once the materials have been purchased, the work order and production orders have been created, that is material and labor added, received in inventory, we need to ship the units to the customers. Both the 7.9.5 pre-shipper shipper work bin confirm and the 7.9.15 sales order shipments affect MRP calculations by decreasing inventory, that is MRP can no longer see it, and it increases accounts receivable. The accuracy and timeliness of these ISS-SO transaction is critical to MRP. Shipping is another one of those critical processes need for MRP renetting. Shipping transaction ISS-SO affects the reduction of the quantity on hand, is critical, reduction of gross requirements, reduction or elimination of all allocations. It updates the quantity picked, shipped, in quantity pending on the sales order record, and eliminates required dates which cause the MRP renet. Timely processing of these shipments is critical, especially if you're working under a revenue recognition for the accounting standards update number 2016.10 issued in April of 2016. The 2314 MRP detail report, we see the quantity on hand is reduced by the shipment, and the sales order shipped no longer lists as part of the gross requirements. That is, demand has been reduced, and there's a corresponding increase in accounts receivable. Because the sales order is so central to everything that we are trying to do to satisfy our customer requirements, every element of 7.1.1 sales order maintenance must be 100% accurate, from the sales order header with the customer, due dates, consume, forecast, status, to the sales order line of part numbers, quantities, dates, allocations needs to be 100% accurate. 7.3.13 customer scheduled orders create a special type of sales order that includes both order fields and item planning fields. These cumulative schedule-driven orders have multiple lines with sets of due dates and quantities that can be released with multiple shipments against an order based on the customer's planned requirements. Planning, shipping, and sequence schedules are sent to you by your company. Then in the 7.3.13, customer orders are created for the customer schedule. In many industries, these are becoming mandatory. These are used extensively in the automotive industry. As with supplier schedules, customer schedules require a bit more love and attention than just a straight sales order. Here we see the schedule setup of calendar, labels, order processing definitions. We also see customer schedule processing, planned schedule maintenance, ship schedule maintenance, required ship schedule, and sequential maintenance. Customer schedules are different than sales orders in MRP. The key differences being that a customer schedule is expected demand over future weeks and months. Sales orders are firm commitments. Customer schedules are not financially binding. Sales orders represent invoiceable transactions. Accountants get involved. Customer schedules can be updated frequently, and normally sales orders are just fixed transactions. If a forecast doesn't material, there's no sales order tied to a customer schedule. Customer schedules contain quantities desired per period. Sales orders have firm delivery dates and quantities, much more difficult to change. Customer schedules help plan potential material capacity. However, sales orders drive execution. Customer schedules are linked to sales forecasts, whereas sales orders are linked to shipping and financial documents. My recommendation, use customer schedules. All things in MRP start with quantity on hand. We define the perpetual record as continually updated quantity on hand and how it got there. The MRP process starts with that 95 quantity on hand. Perpetual record, the continuously updated quantity on hand. You can see if we start 500, we see allocations that is going to affect the quantity on hand, and that perpetual record needs to be 100% accurate at all times. I don't have time to go through each transaction, but planners must know how each and every transaction affects MRP. Cycle counting is the process that ensures the 100% accuracy of the perpetual record. Another webinar out on the 32Soft website as to how to do physical inventory and cycle counting. Physical inventory may be required based on external considerations, counting, audits, those kind of things. So once per period, you may have to organize and execute a complete wall-to-wall. Caution, oftentimes physical inventories make quantity on hand more accurate. Be careful, plan well, execute, and control. Either way, MRP requires 100% accurate. Now, I'm not recommending any particular barcoding situation. I'm just pointing out that the perpetual record is easier to track, control accurately with a barcode system. Each one of these takes planning, commitment, cost, IT support, training, and discipline. The automated solutions is already incorporated into QAD, but you could use Eagle, Freedom, Radley, others. Barcoding equals better transaction control, eliminates fat finger errors. Talk to Terry Oneka about how important barcoding is in automotive. Material requirements planning has become the standard scheduling process, or at least the basis of most scheduling processes for modern manufacturing. Today, we've talked about MRP, purchase orders, supplier schedules, work orders, customer schedules, and sales orders. There's over 115 specific areas and menus and functions in QAD that affect MRP. Any of these can cause MRP to calculate differently or even incorrectly. Understanding the concepts and correct application of these concepts can make MRP do what is intended, that is, create a plan that can be executed successfully. This thing called MRP is one of the biggest, most complex video games ever designed by mankind. It is a very powerful tool in manufacturing if you know how it works and how to make it work. I hope you've enjoyed this quick session. We'll plan to discuss more on optimizing the role of requirements planning at QAD on May 15th in conjunction with the West Coast spring online session. I hope you join us then. For planners who deal with MRP, it helps to understand all the tables and fields that make MRP work correctly. Managing MRP data has always been time consuming and tricky. It requires a good understanding of basic principles and strategies, and it requires a lot of manual keying. For that reason, many users decide to store MRP details in separate spreadsheets rather than in the QAD system. I've even seen people try to create MRP in a spreadsheet. Not a good idea. The tale to tell is do not use spreadsheets. 32Soft's myriads of data loaders for managing MRP related details makes update of QAD fast, safe, easy, and error-free. Loaders can bring logic and accuracy and consistency to your planning process. MRP requires a lot of data to feed the beast. MRP is one of those hard things about ERP, and you want to increase your acumen regarding MRP over time. I'd recommend these online resources, books, courses, certification, and there's lots of changes in QAD over the next many months and years with the transition to QAD's 03. Lots to learn. You can use the MRP QAD forums, QAD user groups. West Coast, Midwest, Southeast have excellent discussion and resource boards. The QAD knowledge base, my go-to after F1, artificial intelligence is going to make this amazing. I have to talk to Tony Winter about that. You really need to explore AI if you're going to be employed in manufacturing and planning in the future. There's the QAD library, everything you ever wanted to know about QAD if you look hard enough, and the QAD Learning Center, great place to learn about QAD functionality. There are a couple of additional resources out there in the LinkedIn groups, and the Progress Talk QAD forum has some good information on MRP. And we have included on the 32Soft website a URL page that links all of the documents, records, sites that I used for this presentation. Always a good idea to learn how to use social media and the new artificial intelligence for searching in this age of Aquarians. We hope you've enjoyed this quick overview for QAD's MRP functionality and how we might use that to address the changes on a daily basis. Your ability to control and schedule and provide the required data to MRP is critical for your success in today's competitive environment. Please contact Denise, Alex, Nancy, or myself if you think you have any additional questions. Thank you so much. And Denise, back to you.
Thanks, Don. Fantastic. Lots of information. Fantastic as always. We will move directly into the Q&A session as mentioned at the beginning. For now, we'll go ahead and move along. As Don did mention already, next month, we are really excited to show a powerful ERP independent production scheduler. This will be particularly helpful if you have sites that are not on QAD or any organization not using an ERP system. This webinar will be available on demand on April 17th for a full 24-hour period. And then, as Don also mentioned, in May, he will present optimizing the role of MRP in QAD for the West Coast User Group's Spring Zoom series. Anyone can attend these sessions, although there is a small fee if you're not a West Coast User Group member. Also, in April, between these two sessions, we will be attending, as Don mentioned, the Midwest User Group Spring Conference in Milwaukee. And as usual, Don will be presenting, of course, but he will have, as mentioned, a co-presenter for Factory Physics on Monday at 11:30 in the morning to open the business process track. Before we close out today's session, for anyone who may have missed the beginning today, or as a reminder, the thank you for attending email you will receive tomorrow from Alex will contain your link at the bottom of the email. So be sure to download your personalized certificate of attendance. And okay, for those of you who joined us last month, I said I might quote Don for this month's closing, and I did. MRP is not a magic bullet. We are the magic bullet. And of course,
Oh, I love it. Isn't
there
that
is
great?
a really important caveat though, right, Don? We
Right.
cannot set it and forget it.
That's right. Exactly. Exactly.
Well, thank you, Don, for everything, for your time taken to prepare and share with us your expertise, and always coming ready to answer the questions. And as always, thank all of our attendees today for taking the time out to join us live. We hope to see you at an upcoming webinar or conference. From all of us at 32Soft, have a great day, everybody. Bye-bye.